I felt body shamed. I felt slut shamed. I felt all these things. But worst of all, I felt that I had done something that was now going to undermine this true and authentic purpose that so many others have joined to. And I had to go through that sort of self-assessment piece. It's like, hey, no, I can't change the past. And if anything, that's a fantastic experience for me. I still couldn't believe that was happening to any Australian citizen, let alone, me. Like and that's been more fuel for the fire, because if that happened to someone else that I knew, like, I would refuse to allow that to happen. And I have a 17-year-old nephew and an 11-year-old niece. And my actions here now in dealing with these things are the legacy that I want them to remember and carry on. And I want them to know that it is not okay to be bullied. It is not okay for people to attack you personally for some form of an agenda.
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have the authentic leader, Heston Russell. Heston is a retired Special Forces veteran, founder of the charity Veteran Support Force, and leader of the Australian Values Party. What I personally love about this conversation is Heston's absolute power that he exudes through his mission in breaking the stigma surrounding mental health and vulnerability, and his passion in fighting for true and authentic values of leadership. Heston is a man that what you see is indeed what you get. This conversation is one of the realest and most raw ones that I have had to date. We discuss the impact of emotional compartmentalisation, suicidal ideation, sexuality, war crime accusations, and smear campaigns. I truly honour Heston for the personal power he brings to this conversation. This podcast does have a trigger warning, as we obviously cover mental health topics, so please be aware of this, and I will provide support numbers below. Please enjoy this important conversation with Heston Russell. Welcome to the podcast, Heston.
G'day, Jennah-Louise. Thanks so much for having me on.
So Heston, where I want to start is with a quote from your website. And you said, "I've lived a life that has taken me to the extremes of experiences and emotions." And I thought that this was a very beautiful space to start this conversation in. That I know you were 16 years you were in the military, and no doubt you sort of experienced these extremes of experiences and emotions. But I'm curious, is this where it started, or were you someone sort of before then that kind of lived life to the extremes?
Good question. So I entered the military straight out of school, which in Queensland meant I just turned 17 in November, and January I was off. I hadn't really lived a lot of extremes in my childhood. My father was in the army. We moved around a bit. The extremes I probably experienced as a child were those of emotions, to be honest. I sort of struggled a bit with my parents' divorce. I ended up being like the fat kid, grade 8 and 9 at school, which, as we all know, sort of that age is terrible. Like, I had no friends, all those sort of things. And probably deep down, I was also struggling with my sexuality a bit, which I didn't even realize was something to struggle with. So I think I definitely picked up a lot of and I was, bullied a bit, as I think we all were, but particularly for the whole fat, unpopular, never had a girlfriend, all that sort of stuff. So I think I brought a lot of emotional experience into my military career, sort of knowing what it would have been like to have been helped by someone who could have helped me, what it would have been like to, live the life of someone that I saw more aspirational than myself, and I put myself down a lot. And then the military is where I got a lot of that real world experience, where I got to actually put a lot of those things into perspective. Once you actually go overseas and support people who, literally can't support or defend themselves, or are being targeted or persecuted by others, that's when you kind of like, wow, this is some real world relevance and real world perspective that is now amazing for me to learn, and also a responsibility for me to remember and try and introduce wherever I can.
And whilst you were in the military, how did that help you develop your relationship with emotions? Because you sort of share, you're in grade 7 and 8, you're the kid that's a little bigger, maybe sort of bullied, you're struggling with your sexuality, like stuff's going on, right? How does that sort of start to develop into more of that matured adult during the military?
I think that's actually one of the key areas. And I work at the moment within a veterans charity, Veteran Support Force, and I've done the last year sort of campaigning for more awareness in the veteran community itself about a lot of these issues that come down to essentially emotional maturity, like we're talking about. But to be honest, the military is probably one of the worst for my development of that emotional maturity, because what we do is we're so readily able to compartmentalize our emotions.
Right.
Emotions are seen as impacting on decision making. Making emotive decisions and all that is the worst place for that is anywhere within the military, and especially what I was working within. Operationally, actually going out and doing the job on the ground. But what we did not do adequately was separate those emotions from our professional life and recognize those that are in our personal life. And as we all know, everyone is regulated by our emotions, and your ability to inspire people comes down to your ability to establish some form of an emotional connection to what that person believes. And I was always able to be very emotionally intelligent in my development as a leader. And I think that comes from living through, that sort of a bit of emotional suffering myself, if I'll put it that way, and the ability to connect and empathize and actually have compassion for people and look out for people. That really enabled me, particularly as a leader, being responsible for people. But I never really had to face my own emotions. I was always able to be responsible for others. I was always able to be responsible for a task or a purpose. And I was always able to make my emotions subordinate to those tasks, those people, those purpose. And I never truly got to connect and be my whole authentic self. Now, I was 90% my authentic self. There was 5 to 10% of that was still struggling with some of those elements that I just didn't want to introduce into my professional life, because particularly in the military, it's so amazing because it's so transparent and it's so accountable. You are really assessed on your actions and attitudes each and every day, because you're actually out there doing physical tasks. You're out there, planning missions, going and doing missions, things like that. There's no place to hide behind your keyboard and write a strongly worded email. You're exposed for your character and competence each and every day. And I love that. And in hindsight, I made the decision to remove all of my personal emotions from that, because it allowed me to focus on that. But now in hindsight, there was 5 to 10% of myself that I was constantly not bringing to giving 100% effort. And that's just learning and experience. And that's just that power of connecting with and unleashing your authentic self. And that comes from recognizing your own emotions, making the difference between, weakness and vulnerability. And unfortunately for me, that only came in the final step of my emotional maturity, which was sort of the last couple of years, and has only been the last couple of years of my life.
I'd love to explore that more, because, a past partner of mine had been in the military, and I've had friends, I know Scotty Evanet. I've had friends in my life that have all spoken about this same theme of having to compartmentalize your emotions in the military. So I'm really intrigued, if you were to go back, knowing what you know now, how possible is it to be successful and emotionally regulated in the military if you were more connected with your emotions? Do you think that is truly possible, or do you think that it is necessary to kind of be able to separate yourself in those moments because you are doing such extreme things?
I think it really is necessary to have that ability to switch off your emotions and compartmentalize your emotions. But having said that, the decompartmentalization of those emotions has to be more than expecting someone to go see a psychologist. And that's the whole, support network, who you feel comfortable being vulnerable with, leaning into these conversations, appreciating that trauma or issues dig deeper the longer they remain in you. So I say it's important because there are a lot of situations in my career, if I just allowed myself to embrace the emotions of that it literally would have been too overwhelming. I lost one of my very best guys in 2012 who was killed by an IED, and the horror of that type of stuff, and then having to leave my guys, let alone the loss of someone that you've been working with the last 2 years. Throughout my career, I've known, too many people who have been killed in combat, who have subsequently died by suicide. There's a lot in this world that if you don't train your emotions, it can be very easy to be overtaken by them. And particularly for me, when I had that responsibility, not only to myself and to my family, but to my team and to the mission, it is that balancing act. And I think here and now, having gone through the last 2 years of personal emotional development and decompartmentalization and training and resilience and whatever, I would definitely go back into the military tomorrow and be a better leader. But it's very easy to get a heavy heart. It's very easy to care too much once you appreciate how good it is to care so much. It's a bit of a balancing act, but that's why, and again, we're dealing with a military system that has a job to do, that can potentially be go anywhere to do anything to save lives or take lives. That emotional compartmentalisation is extremely important.
And in 2019, you left the military. And this is where I feel like the mental health piece really comes up for you. And to my understanding, you actually got to the point where you yourself had suicidal ideation. You shared that you had undiagnosed anxiety, depression, PTSD, like you really were in the thick of it yourself. Can you sort of share more about that time in your life and coming to the realization of what you were fully experiencing?
For sure, yeah. My last deployment, so I deployed to Afghanistan 4 times, and I deployed to Iraq as my last deployment in 2016 and got back 2017, early 2017. And I took all the leave I had in my book and moved over to the US to live with my then boyfriend, Blake, who I kept completely separate from my work. We'd be seeing each other for about a year. And I sort of lost myself just in having no responsibilities and just, I fell in love. I literally did. And I started to transition away from the military, and Blake and I ended up bringing the brand Barry's Boot Camp here to Australia. And when you're in the special forces, you're not meant to have a public profile. Like our social media wasn't even you weren't allowed to have it. It wasn't allowed to be public. It wasn't allowed to be in your own name. I had none of that profile. And then I was always fit. I was always kind. I was always a hard worker. And over that sort of 2-year period, 2017, 18, I really managed to pick up the attention, particularly in this gay community that I started to throw myself into, because I found this community that just started to accept me for being gay as opposed to anything else that I brought. And it was nice to have a safe place where for once I could finally be that 10% of me that I was hiding, and, to not be relied on to be this poster boy military image that I prided myself on and held myself so accountable to. But I sort of lost myself along that way because I started to become fixated on that new image, that new identity within that community. And fast forward, long story short, Blake and I broke up, literally arriving back into Australia to go into the nationwide lockdown together, still broken up.
No. Not the best time.
And the world sort of started to fall apart for me. And by April of that year, I found myself with not secured employment, single. Luckily, I had my little sausage dog Copper, but I've never been that lonely in my life. And throughout my career, from the day I graduated, I was always responsible for at least 30 people, up to 150 people, and I didn't have my family around me. I didn't have any of that, and I was just so lonely. And for me, it was failure. I saw it as absolute failure. I never really failed at anything in my life, in my career, and that's not because of me. That's because of my training, because of my dedication, and also because of the team I always had around me. And as opposed to reach out for help, because so many people still relied on me to be that strong image for them and that poster boy military for them. I allowed myself to just perpetuate and spiral. And come August that year, actually after hearing about another one of my veteran mates who had tried to take his life, I sort of found myself thinking I had new purpose. By then I had a social media profile. I'd already been campaigning to better support veterans struggling with mental health, indirectly advocating for myself as well.
Right.
So I decided that by, sort of taking my own life, I'd be able to achieve the cut through that this conversation needed. But I had a bit of an aha moment thanks to my dog, and sort of turned into realizing that I was probably the best person to tell my story, not someone else reading a note or an email that I was writing. And, even linking in, finally actually seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist voluntarily, really appreciating and changing the lexicon from mental health to mental fitness. Because just like we see with COVID at the moment, we can only be reactive to our health for so long. And by the time you're reactive, it's already too late. Preventative health and proactive measures are what counts. And the amount of us who go to the gym, a couple of times a week, or have a trainer, or, consult a nutritionist or whatever, my psychologist or psychiatrist is my mental fitness professional that I see once a week, but you need more than that. You need to embrace your own vulnerability, have conversations that go deeper than the superficial level, because by the time your cup is full, it's already too late. So there was a huge part of that for me to realize that I'm not the Superman that I want to be. I've done some amazing things, but I've got to stop resting on the best days of my life being those that I was in the military, that I was able to, fly overseas with my team and help people. And when I was struggling with, the biggest purpose I had in that day is to wake up and take my dog for a walk. It's difficult when you feel like you don't fit in a world. And that's because I was focusing too much on the purpose that I can provide to others, as opposed to like who I am when none of that is around. And that's really what I think COVID has helped us to strip apart, to make us really focus on who we are when there's no noise, people or anything else around.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this because I listened to a podcast that you did with a friend, Corey Boutwell. And there was something that I actually wrote down that I wanted to speak to you about, because I saw it was so powerful for Corey. And as a listener, I was like, that was fantastic. And you spoke about a sort of recent lesson of yours being sort of allowing yourself to be connected to people without having to provide a service, and essentially sort of connect for the sake of connecting. Can you share more about that lesson? Because I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, that was a good podcast with Corey. He really got me talking down deep. But yeah, I think we talked about our love languages, and I'm sort of built to serve. I really enjoy being able to put whatever I can into play to help other people. That's how I really feel most value. And what that sort of does to me is perpetuate this tendency to only be able to engage with people when I know I can do something to help them, or there's something to be done. And what I've realized is the best preventative measure to anything in this world, loss of purpose, loss of identity, is the community and those people we surround ourselves. And when I say community, I simply mean those that we need to provide us with our support network, those who we need around us to be able to allow us to be vulnerable enough. And, connection comes through vulnerability when, someone is speaking to you openly, honestly, and authentically. And allowing myself to connect with people just to listen to them, or just to be with them, just to be around them, is one of the most uncomfortable things for me, because I always want to try and be useful, and I always want to try and show my value. And my psychologist will tell you, I'm sure that goes back to a whole bunch of childhood issues.
It always does.
It also really comes down to, that was my whole career, was solving other people's problems and solving problems that weren't meant to be solved. So I think it's a mindset piece. It's really doing that own self-assessment and going, hey, I don't need to just be around others in order to help them, because just being around others and allowing myself to connect and potentially not being the one solving the problems, or actually potentially let someone into something that is impacting my life through a lens of responsibility, not entitlement, you're actually going to build this bridge that is stronger than any form of transactional relationship you're going to find. And that's definitely still a work in progress.
And you shared that you have seen sort of both a psychiatrist and psychologist, and obviously sort of the two are different in the sense of psychiatrists can sort of prescribe medication for mental health. Yeah. In your experience of seeing these types of people, what has been most useful for you so far?
Oh, good. So again, I like to think that I know more than I know, and I went through my own self-diagnosis, and I found a psychologist who was a beautifully compassionate, empathetic lady. She's from South Africa, so it made it even better. She had an accent, right? Yeah. And with her, I felt a lot more vulnerable to talk about different areas and different elements. And I don't tell too many people this, but I've suffered from a bit of an eating disorder as well, as I went down that sort of mental health piece as well. And she helped me really appreciate that, triggers like as loneliness and all this other things. And she helped me, allow me to feel a lot more vulnerable talking about some of those conversations and issues that might seem a little bit more in the cliche of being, non-masculine issues and shit like that. Or as in for me to be less masculine in speaking about them, there's this sort of perpetuation that I carry through with this male responsibility as well. And then I found my psychiatrist, who I still see, and he helped me be diagnosed with ADHD, which is great. I think that's a perpetuation of my military career, where you're just solving so many different problems at once, and the variety and everything there is amazing. And then when you come to a far less extrinsically engaging environment, it's so hard to maintain focus on one thing. And even just through taking some medication, I'm like, holy cow, this stuff actually works. Whereas I would always usually try and shy away from that. But I found him because he also specialized in gay relationship issues. I literally thought that my emotional fracture that was causing all of these uncontrolled emotions and my inability to regulate my emotions was coming from some issues with my breakup with my boyfriend. So I thought I felt a lot more vulnerable talking to a gay man about that, as opposed to, talking to my psychologist about, gay male issues. And it was just interesting how I could cover off on the two. But, they both do that psychology work. But yeah, I think it's very important even just to talk about, like, I also take medication for depression as well. I've definitely been weaning myself off it, and I just sort of take it every now and then. But, even appreciating, like, that's okay. Like, I've taken plenty of supplements over my life for training and whatnot. And again, this is mental health comes down to mental fitness, what you do to build and support and strengthen that. As long as we don't turn into a lot of my people I know in the US who have a pill for everything, like
Right.
this stuff works. And, you see the right people and appreciate that, help is available, and take it if you need it.
Yeah, I definitely, medication is obviously a controversial topic, but my own personal opinion of it is, like, it can give a period of grace for some people. Like, if you really are sort of in a hole, like, this medication can help you chemically, but it also is to be able to sort of have that element of empowerment and sense of responsibility in your life that, you may not need this medication long term, and there may be, strategies in place that you can help yourself. And I think sometimes the two can be quite beneficial.
I agree. The best remedy I have found is reconnecting with my old veteran community and finding those people that I finally felt comfortable in bridging those gaps between who I was professionally, who I am today personally, even conversations about my sexuality. Because what I used to do is I would always segment myself through those different sort of demographics. And I now have found people in my life who understand me holistically. And you finally get to remove that 5 to 10% of doubt and uncertainty in your brain and put it forward. And it's actually being around those people and turning, the way I feel love into quality time, just being around those people. That is better than any medication I've ever had. And like you said, it's only when I sort of get into a rut, particularly on the depressive side, which hasn't been in a long time, that I turn to that. However, the other best medication I have found is I now have a 2.5-year-old sausage dog, and I had never had a dog in my life. I literally had never had a dog in my life. And it's funny when you talk about that emotional compartmentalisation. In the military, I had working dogs and attack dogs and all that. And it was always, again, a dog for a purpose. But my little guy, who just loves unconditionally, and the number one remedy for anxiety or depression is to bring people back to living in the moment. So you're not worrying about what has happened. You're not worrying about what is happened. You watch a dog, you watch a small child. These are amazing creatures and people that will bring you to living in the moment. And that's when you finally get to connect to that moment right there and then. That is the best remedy for any of your mental health, and just filling your life with those things that help you to come back to that center, that in the moment. My little guy, I call him my walking antidepressant, and I'm absolutely mean it.
And I mean, it's so true. I was actually reading a book recently that talks about the research behind this. And apparently the 3 top animals for this are dogs, horses, and funny enough, dolphins, in using to sort of support people that sort of are having those mental health challenges, which I thought was really cool.
Brilliant.
So I want to speak to you about sort of your transition into becoming open about your sexuality and about being gay. Because I heard you share something that I thought was really interesting about this. And you said you yourself had tried to do sort of your own form of conversion therapy on yourself. No one ever made you or influenced you to stay in the closet, so to speak, right? So I want to learn more about, like, what was within you that kind of influenced you to do that?
I never had the perspective of what a successful gay male was within what I wanted my life to be.
Mm.
I never knew that I'd met a gay person growing up. I still grew up in a bit of an era. I'm 36 years old now, so I grew up, in a bit of an era where, it was still seen as, there was still that segregation. It was seen as wrong. It was seen as different. You'd imagine my head is so pragmatic and purposeful, that, two men can't have bear children the natural way, things like that. My head just, it didn't fit the mold. No one around me, no one in my family, all of that. And, I was also brought up around the military, which is a very, male dominated environment. And, and when I just started to, feel some of those emotions, like it scared the crap out of me because, I let alone struggling with my own body image and my own inability to connect with a woman and have a girlfriend, then to throw in something that was going to be an even big block, like these weird feelings I was getting. It's like, I just wanted to get rid of it. There was already enough things in my life going on that I didn't like to go through that. So, throughout my 20s, I definitely threw myself into having lots of female partners and trying to find someone who could be my girlfriend. But I was never able to, and by then I was in the military. So I actually never wanted to have any form of an emotional connection that detracted from my job, because I found the military to be something that was so much more purposeful than anything in my personal life. I never wanted my personal life to impact on that. So again, unfortunately, it came a little bit more sort of transactional, a lot of these relationships. And I still never had a girlfriend, and I maybe tried once or twice, but there just wasn't that level of comfort because I saw none of that around me. And it was only when I finally and I lived a year in the US, 2015, on exchange to one of their special forces units, that I actually hung out with some people that I met in LA, and I started to meet some very professional gay men who I didn't know they were gay until I was introduced to them. And by this time I'd been living in Sydney, and, I'd snuck out to Oxford Street every now and then, which back then scared the crap out of me, drag queens and midriffs and all this, it really scared me because it was like very visually gay, but there was still a part of me who was confused because I felt that was something that I was meant to be embracing. So when I finally got to meet probably a little bit more of the conservative gay side of the house, or people who weren't using their sexuality to define their personality, I started to realize that there was actually different elements to it, and I didn't have to conform to any particular pattern. And then as I've grown, I've been able to swing myself between the two. And it was meeting a few of those people and then realizing, and then finally meeting, I've had 2 boyfriends, so both of my boyfriends, and appreciating how actually happy I could be when I allowed myself to have that personal, emotional connection and trying to find that balance professionally, that I realized that for starters, my sexuality is personal, it's mine.
Right.
And that regardless of what the rest of the world says, I actually don't have to be defined by what I do in my personal life. I get to write my own label. And I guess I told my mum and my sister in 2015, I told my dad in 2016, and I made it my sort of mission from them that the label I carry is Heston Russell.
Beautiful.
There is one me, and there are so many elements that make me up. But for too long, and even in my mental health struggle, as we talked about, 2019, 2020, that's because I was trying to juggle the label of, what I had in the gay community, trying to reach back to being, my special forces veteran life. And, I just had these conflicting identities that I didn't know how to put together. And I felt I was letting them both down, and I was being isolated from them both. And there was too much uncertainty within those. And it finally came to this realization of I am who I am. And so there's only 3 people I've sat down and told that I'm gay. And that was my sister, my mum, and my dad. And everyone else, if they ask, I tell them, but I've never abided by the fact that I need to tell people.
Right.
And that's not coming from a place of hiding it. Most people know these days, but I just don't use it as a badge of entitlement. It is actually my badge of responsibility to demonstrate not to be defined by any one label, because I wish that there was someone out there like me when I was younger to be able to go like, holy cow, like I'm allowed to be whoever the hell I am, as long as who I am and what I do each and every day is the mark and measure of me as a person.
Powerful. I love it. So you're obviously a man, that's coming across as someone that's sort of very integrous, I would say. I feel like that's very important to you. So I'm going to take a turn here because I want to talk about sort of the ABC wartime accusations. And I think this is essentially how I came across you, Heston.
Okay.
And this was a lot. This was a lot to kind of go through as someone sort of watching you go through what you have, but now obviously seeing how this has, come to fruition for you. I think it's an important story to kind of share. I'm seeing you even shift body language. It's shifting into a different energy. We're getting a different body language here. A bit more fierce, I'd say.
I just want to do it justice because there's so much into it, particularly as you talk about emotion. This was such a pretty incredible time with me, but I'll let you ask your question.
Well, I think, and I would say I would love to give you the freedom to kind of share what you'd like to share on this topic. But from the outside, I feel like this was really beautiful in a sense to watch you in this journey, because I feel like you've really come into your own through this. Like you really have kind of stepped into, you're the leader of the Australian Values Party. Like this isn't just sort of an experience that's happened and you've simply moved forward from. This is kind of like fed the development of your trajectory and where you're heading. So I would love to sort of know more about, how this affected you and why this is so important to you even now, in terms of, I guess, your own experience, but also like leadership in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. Going back to the integrity piece, in the military, if someone questions your integrity, it is the worst possible insult you can ever have. If you don't have your integrity, you don't have anything. Like the military is built upon so much trust because things happen so much, and you're literally putting, your life and everything else in. It is such an interoperating support network that you need to have. And yeah, so for the quick timeline, the 30th of August is when I had my suicidal ideation, and I immediately sort of it took me a couple of weeks, and when I started connecting with some other people, including Scotty Evanet and some other of my guys, who I managed to put a little thing in the paper because I found purpose. Like I said, I found purpose through realizing I didn't need to die to find that purpose, but I can actually put it into action. And I threw myself in 100%. And it was a great lesson learned for me, particularly when you're actually still recovering from a place of trauma, like to even tell my mum and my sister and my family that I had gone that low, and to actually accept myself that in that moment, it wasn't a slump into depression with a whiskey bottle. It was literally the most focused I've been in so long, thinking this is what I absolutely have to do. And that scared the crap out of me. And it was a lot to embrace that myself. And then when you're operating from a place of being, of trauma, you probably overcommit yourself a lot. And that's what I sort of did. And as soon as you find purpose, because you've been lost for a while, you grab it with both hands. And 2 months later, or a month and a half later, come October 21st, which was the 8th year anniversary of the death of my guy, Scott Smith, in Afghanistan. On that exact same day, the ABC released a story that was from a single US Marine who said he heard a pop on a radio and accused my platoon of committing a war crime back in 2012. And on that day, I met up with my guys down at North Bondi RSL, as we do on Scotty's anniversary. And Scotty's mum was there. I hadn't seen his mum in 8 years. And it rocked me. It rocked me so hard. That night back home was a really tough night for me because I had done everything that I could in my career to protect my guys. And here we were right now, long after, 8 years after it. And that next week I sort of sat there and I took to social media to do all that I could because I felt powerless, and I was waiting for defense. I was waiting for the Department of Foreign Affairs. I was waiting for any of these people I'd just been speaking to the last month to even reach out and say, hey, are you okay? Like, this is pretty crazy. I heard from no one in government, not a single person. And I heard from no one in government step up and say, hey, we're about to release this war crimes report. Let's at least wait till things go through the court, And what I've learned over the last 2 years is there's no innocent until proven guilty in this country. If an accusation hits the media, you are guilty until you are proven innocent, and they just have to use words like alleged.
Right.
And it's just, and you can't defend it unless you can afford a lawyer. And even then it's 3, 6, 12 months later. So long story short, then the Burton report was released, and they wanted to take away the honours and awards, the unit citation from over 3,000 Special Forces veterans. And I unfortunately know about 12 of the Special Forces veterans who died, of the 41 who died in Afghanistan. And I was contacted by one of those families who weren't even contacted before the Defence Force and government stepped up and said they were going to take those awards. And they were asking me the question, because they'd been in the media, if that meant that they were going to take them away from the 21 dead veterans, dead heroes who died as well. And that was a turning point. And that's where I started to step out and raised a petition to retain them. And within 2 weeks, we had 90,000 signatures. And sort of from there, I really became a bit of a front man for veteran issues, which again was this purpose that I needed to reconnect with my community, show my value, acts of service, all the rest. Mm. And as more and more I picked apart that problem, I then realized I kept trying to solve these problems at these levels, but then the overarching level was just how much, the whole veteran support system, particularly the Department of Foreign Affairs, Department of Veteran Affairs, and Department of Defence fail in transitioning our veterans and supporting our veterans after service. And it's not, medical and all that. It's that emotional decompartmentalisation you and I talking about. What you do when you go to discharge is they get you to write down all your competencies. They go through all that and they provide you with a resume. And where the military completely removes your individual identity and replaces it with a collective identity, a collective purpose, values, and all this, there is no constitution of your individual identity before you leave, as opposed to a transactional identity that they match you with, and the unrealistic expectation that is going to then match a life in the corporate world that is going to provide you with anywhere near the purpose and fulfillment and satisfaction you had in defense. And we go through this pendulum swing, and too many fall off at the end. So then the more I kept trying to solve these problems up, I realized that the problems are right at the top. And what I was doing is solving problems at all these different levels and really putting my heart and soul into them all. And at the top of the level, there'd been this call for calling a Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide. And essentially all roads led to that. And that was one of the biggest political topics. And I honestly actually thought that the policy and legislation that the government was proposing was a much more pragmatic thing to do. But during my work with then Voice of a Veteran and just getting out and doing what I said I needed to do and connecting with my community and talking with people, I actually realized that, again, per conversations when you're talking about trauma, it had gone past logic. It was now an emotive issue. And when people felt so disrespected and felt further traumatized, you can no longer try and polish it over with any new thing, that particularly something that this policy was untried, unproven. So that's when I put my back into joining with others in campaigning for the Royal Commission. And that's where I got my biggest insight into politics. When I literally turned up to Canberra and spoke with a few people and got an idea about literally drafting a motion that had one line that said the suicide rate of current serving defence personnel is less than half of the Australian community average, and then more than doubles when they leave defence. Like, that in itself is frog in hot water moment.
So powerful.
And then calls on the government to call a Royal Commission. And it was only token because only the Prime Minister can call a Royal Commission. He has to ask the Governor-General to call a Royal Commission. But, as we do, thinking pragmatically how to solve problems, if the entire Senate and the entire lower house, so therefore the entire Parliament, passes a motion, then the Prime Minister would be compelled to do that. Working with Jackie Lambie in the Senate and then working with a bunch of the independents and finally actually getting and I literally went door to door meeting with people and got a couple of people from the Nationals Party who were going to cross the floor on it. And the motion passed the Senate and passed the lower house unanimously, but behind closed doors, there was it was fascinating to see the rivalry, the dog eat dog, how politicized these things came. I knew straight away that in order for anyone on the Senate or the lower house to vote against this, because there'd never previously been a conversation, it was just this as opposed to this versus this, would be political suicide for them, because the Australian public wants to support our veterans and all this. But to see the games and the spin and how ruthless some of these people became to each other inside their own parties really was insightful for me. And I had to spend 4 years in Canberra, just down the road from Parliament House, learning how to be a platoon commander, to be in charge of 30 people for 4 years before I was allowed to be in charge of my first group of 30 people. And the leadership qualities and academics that I learned about leadership and managing people and all the things we talked about previously started from those 4 years working in Adford and RMC. And then I was there dealing with those people who are meant to be, in my opinion, our elite level of leaders in this country. And all I saw was them relying on authority and motivating people through fear and control, as opposed to leadership, which is inspiring people, motivating people through inspiration. And, you know, the games and the tactics and, you know, even engaging with some of the staff members. And this was around the time that the just after the Brittany Higgins incident had occurred. And, you know, the amount of staff members I'd seen walk in those hallways drunk on a Thursday afternoon. And it just reminded me of a bloody schoolyard and seeing how they were acting on the floor. And that's where I sort of went, you know, the reason why we're having all of these problems is because culture absolutely starts from the top. And leaders who don't lead by example set the conditions for toxic culture to perpetuate anywhere and everywhere. And I noticed there's a lack of accountability, there's a lack of responsibility, but the key part is there's a lack of actual leadership. We have leaders who are so comfortable in being whatever their job title, their position, and wielding their authority, as opposing to appreciating that leadership is a service to others. Leadership is not about being served by others. So I sort of did my own analysis and realized, you know, hey, I'm going to continuously keep trying to fix all the problems I can for my veteran community. Whereas particularly at that time we're going through COVID, like the Australian community, you know, I can grab so many of those lessons learned from my own mental health journey, from what I've seen in here. You know, the last 18 months of my job in Special Forces was redesigning and running the Special Forces selection course, working with an amazing team. So putting all those skills, all that lived experience I have been blessed and now responsible with into practice. And so I went about forming the Australian Values Party, as you said. And the end state of the Australian Values Party is to put more good people into politics. So as when a government is formed, we can have people around the table who are there for the true and authentic purpose to actually serve and support the Australian people. And having put them through a lot of those mechanisms that I bring into this and making sure that they have those values that are actually our Australian value statement that sits on the Department of Home Affairs website, that includes respect for the freedom and dignity of the individual, commitment to the rule of law, and equality of opportunity for everyone, regardless of any labels, because we just have to get back to developing an Australian identity that has all of us working together, as opposed to, I have never seen our country more fractured in the last year. And I find it so ironic that we changed our names of our national anthem to say we are one and free, whereas we have families torn apart by being isolated by power-hungry premiers and all the rest of this. And I just want to get back to providing an alternative to people that they can vote for candidates who they can trust, who they know have lived experience, aren't just political academics who have come through parties, and we're going to focus on empowering Australians as opposed to micromanaging Australians. And we've got a pretty exciting announcement happening this week. Yeah, so looking forward to it.
Amazing. So you share that authenticity is incredibly important to you as a value, and particularly in relationship to your leadership. I would love to know, what does authenticity mean to you?
Being your true and authentic self. So again, you would have heard I said previously about I spent too much time trying to be what I thought I was meant to be, or what I thought others were meant to be. You know, and even particularly you see that as we start to approach political conversations. I think authenticity for me means actually bringing who you are into every occasion, not at the expense of others. You know, this is me, accept it. We always, everything, all of my values then go through this lens of responsibility as opposed to entitlement. That's where I feel people become unstuck, you know, being one-sided in their values. But authenticity for me is, you know, not allowing myself to put others on a pedestal or put myself below and hold myself back, because I've been holding myself back for so long, thinking I wasn't worthy, I wasn't good enough, and looking at this toxic comparison as opposed to, you know, who I am and why I need to do that. It also means, you know, speaking up as opposed to shying away from conversations, being okay to be wrong, you know, appreciating that I literally have one life to live, and me being anything other than authentic creates what there's too much in this world, uncertainty for either anyone else in that conversation or that experience, or for myself, realizing that I wasn't being my authentic self in that, and taking up time and space in my head, thinking through, you know, what if I actually had been myself? You know, bring in the best version of yourself that is your authentic self to everything that you do means you can actually go away and have constructive feedback and pragmatic progression in what you do, as opposed to, oh, well, I actually didn't bring who I really was to this situation. So, you know, you're already dealing with a false start.
Something that I really respect about you is, you know, I'll use your words in this sense, but the ABC essentially kind of like created a quote unquote smear campaign against you during sort of this all accusation kind of alleged story that they had created. And I really respect you in the sense that they tried bringing up old stuff about you that you had done, and you completely owned that. And I actually had a recent conversation on the podcast with a guy called Anton Newtonboom, and he was very similar in the sense that he just shows up and he's like completely transparent, and he's like, this is who I am. This is what I've experienced. This is what I'm experiencing now. And there is so much power and freedom in that. And I think in particular, in relation to leadership, like this is something that people are pulled towards, that you can humanize yourself, you know, to be human, to humanize yourself in the way that we can relate to you as a leader. Like that's how we respect our leaders, is understanding that, okay, they will make mistakes. Like, but the most important thing is for you to sort of show up in your accountability and be like, okay, I did something that maybe I'm not proud of, or maybe I wasn't thinking straight back then, but, you know, I've grown, I've learned, and I'm, you know, taking this opportunity to become a better person. And I think there is so much power in that. That's what moves a community, because you're giving permission for other people to show up authentically as well.
Yeah, that's it. And look, particularly talking about when the ABC found my OnlyFans account that I had 2 years ago in 2020 and raised money for a veterans charity. And I've made some, you know, going out hard against the ABC, campaigning for the Royal Commission. You know, I've cracked a few eggs to make a few cakes in the veteran community. People didn't want the Royal Commission. You know, these are very divisive conversations. And now I'm in a place where, you know, those who I've had to step on their toes to achieve what we needed to achieve as fast as possible. You know, I could have done these things in a much more political and embracive way. But when we're talking about saving people's lives and mental health, I have no time for people needing to have their ego stroked along the way. You know, those attacks have come. And particularly when that OnlyFans attack came out, you know, when I had my OnlyFans account in March, April, May of 2020, I had no intentions of becoming a politician. You know, when my mother and my sister know that I've had an OnlyFans account and knew why I was doing it, and also that I told them that I went off the rails because I started to receive more affirmation, receive more money for the purpose that I was doing, you know, I'm okay with that. But then you could imagine, for me, as what you've got already a bit of an insight, you know, for that to be then displayed publicly, and they could have published that article without even publishing the blurred photos, but they still decided to publish the blurred photos. You know, I felt body shamed, I felt slut shamed, I felt all these things, but worst of all, I felt that I had done something that was now going to undermine this true and authentic purpose that so many others have joined to. And I had to go through that sort of self-assessment piece. It's like, hey, no, you know, I can't change the past. And if anything, that's a fantastic experience for me. I still couldn't believe that was happening to any Australian citizen, let alone, you know, me. Like and that's been more fuel for the fire, because if that happened to someone else that I knew, like I would refuse to allow that to happen. And I have a 17-year-old nephew and 11-year-old niece, and my actions here and now in dealing with these things are the legacy that I want them to remember and carry on. And I want them to know that it is not okay to be bullied. It is not okay for people to attack you personally for some form of an agenda. You know, I had to deal with that and get rid of that in the schoolyard. And really appreciating that, you know, having someone from the Australian taxpayer-funded ABC go onto an online troll forum and somehow, I hope they didn't have to pay for it, get a photo that wasn't in the public. They literally went to someone to get it who was exchanged between two consenting adults. I'm like, hold on, that is not right. And I'll be addressing that in due course. But there has been some impact, but if anything, it's helped to highlight the things that need to change. And I'm definitely not a victim, and I don't want to be seen as a victim, but I now see these things going, hey, if that can happen to me, like that can happen to someone else. And I thank God it happened to me, because I finally have a thick skin. And when you come from a place, Jennah-Louise, where I thought that, you know, I had to remove myself from this equation, to then have others come at me and try and remove me from personal attacks, you know, you sort of bring a new resilience to it. Beautiful. Whereby, you know, come what may, there are too many people in this world who will have a prepared statement and try and spin away to this. But it's like, I've lived a full life, you know. My actions here and now are that which define me. Heston Russell is Heston Russell today and tomorrow. And the experience I bring to me, as soon as you start resting on your laurels, for me, you are irrelevant. if you rest on your laurels as any form of entitlement, you are irrelevant. If you bring forward your laurels as responsibility, including those things that you wish you had have changed now, given the 2022 perspective and context, then that's our responsibility.
And I think what I'm sure you've found is the minute that you meet this with honesty and integrity and you completely own what you have done, the story gets boring real quick and people become disinterested in this BS real quick. The story only lives if Heston was to turn up and deny or to make excuses or to justify. The fact that you just completely showed up and own this, like I know from someone from the outsider, it's like, yeah, so what? Who cares? Like, look what he's doing now, you know? So I think, you know, from an outsider's perspective, that's been really powerful for you to do.
Yeah, and I think it's incredible. You know, I haven't done a lot of things in my life that I wish I hadn't done. And for those handful to suddenly be the only thing that people focus on, it definitely took a personal hit. But I think the most important part, you know, if anyone is listening to this and comes across those experiences themselves, is to come to peace with it yourself. Don't get stuck in relying on others to arrive at that similar conclusion that you've come to, Jennah-Louise, and I do love that. I do appreciate that. But if you spend your time hoping that someone else affirms that for you, you know, you're just going to perpetuate this same narrative. You have to, hey, I made a mistake. The first thing you need to do is justify it, is address it to yourself. And it's so easy to put a layer of polish on it for others and, you know, talk your way out of a wet paper bag. But for me, when these things come up, that's the first thing I have to do is go, hey, you know, was I abiding by my current values when this happened? No, I wasn't. Great. You know, what have you learned from that? Bam, 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 bam. And I literally now have a set of values that it's rails, responsibility, authenticity, integrity, leadership, and service. Beautiful. So when I go off the rails or when I have gone off the rails, like I know it, you know,
love it.
I wasn't being responsible. I may have been overly authentic, but you know, the purpose behind it, you know, was I leading and was I doing it in service and things like that? So that's why, you know, even calling my political party the Australian Values Party is, you know, those values, and people speak so much about values, comes down to those guiding principles, that guiding doctrine through which how we do whatever we do, just to make sure that it brings back to who we are and here and now and who we're going to be in the future.
And just bring that humanity to these stories. Like, as you shared, it's like when we tend to go off the rails and we lose our way, like it tends to be because we're disconnected from ourselves when we're trying to seek that connection from other things, that validation, that attention. And that's where we bring a sense of kindness and compassion. We don't shame people for that. We come in with the love and kindness that heals people to you know, allow them the space to grow, which obviously, you know, you've had an amazing support network that's allowed you to flourish into the beautiful person that you are. So thank you so much for this conversation, Heston. I truly appreciate it. I think you're a very powerful, beautiful, authentic person, and I'm truly excited to see what happens for you in the future.
Well, no, thank you so much for creating the space to have these conversations. You know, these are the ones we need more of, and this has been my mental fitness session for today. So thank you. Always.
You're very welcome. So on a final note, I would love to ask you, Heston, what does it mean to you to be human?
That's such a good question. I think what it means to me to be human, and we've spoken about it so much, is just to appreciate everything that goes into that through the lens of responsibility. We are so unique with the ability that we can not only have such a profound impact on our own lives and the lives of those around us, but also allow ourselves to be so inspired by everyone and everything else around us. And I think that's been the biggest part for me in learning to be more human, to be more authentically human, is allowing myself to open up that filter that allows myself to be inspired and to have emotional, positive and negative emotional reactions from others around me. You know, we are this beautiful animal that has the ability to truly embrace and demonstrate and furthermore communicate our emotions. And I think that's the key part to me, is appreciating just how 360 it is, but also how finite that is. And this has been the biggest part that has helped me from the perspective I've had in the military, having lost people, having seen people be lost, is just how finite our life is, and to find whatever we need to do to make sure that we do not allow ourselves to be held back in an infinite mindset, allowing others or ourselves to hold ourselves back, and appreciating we have one life to live and we need to maximize all of it. Because if there's anything that I would hate to do, it is to waste any day of my life, particularly with the perspective of those that I've lost and don't have that opportunity to spend that day on this earth, or to be left as an older version of myself wishing that I had have done more with what I have, just because of I allowed myself or someone else to hold me back.